Why is it that as women we stay stuck and we have these big dreams, we have these huge intentions? Maybe we need to leave a relationship, maybe we need to walk towards a business we want to open, maybe we need to show up bigger around our family. Like, there's so much inside of us because we are sent here with unique gifts and purpose and excitement for life. And sometimes we've like suppressed it for so long and it like peeks its head up and we're like inspired and we're going to do it. But like, why don't we do it? Why? What about our glass ceiling cuts us off? And a lot of what happens is that our physical body is not on board for the change. And so whether it's the nervous system, whether it's like patterns of communication between the brain and the body, whether it's a thinking process and a way in which you activate, like maybe it's your like way that you carry through an action plan that is actually patterned and off base for like where you want to go, like that way isn't going to work to get you there because that's just the way you've always done it, but really the universe is asking you to do something differently. So like, why does our body like stop us? And a lot of times it's because the most familiar things, the most familiar ways in which you exist in the world, which started when you were like under 8 years old, you started to establish a lot of the ways in which you were going to interact with the world. And then you continued that pattern as you grew and created more adult thinking and more complex thoughts. But oftentimes the suppressed parts of the little self inside is what is stopping you from taking the actions that you are trying to take. It is the parts that are so scared inside, like the little girl inside, is what is grabbing the reins. So every time you go to get on a new horse and you're like, I'm gonna do this, it grabs the reins and makes it so that you, Hawk, do you need something? What's up? Okay. Can I help you in just a second? I'm in the middle of recording something. It's okay. So like if you are trying to get on a new horse, but you have like the little girl like pulling the reins every time you're trying to gallop forward with a new concept, a new idea, you're ready to show up. Why is it that you can't? And it's literally like, you know, this other person inside like comes out and is like, no, we can't. That is not safe for us. And typically a lot of us have a good girl complex. So if you take action and do that, you won't be a good person anymore. So like, let's say you've always been really considerate of everybody around you and you people please and you make sure everyone's feelings aren't hurt. Or, you know, let's say you need to leave a relationship and you're just like, but I know just how much that'll hurt them or like what they'll go through. Or, you know, maybe you're dealing with a partner that has self-destructive tendencies and you're like, if I leave, those will get worse, right? So the good girl inside of you is like, no, we don't do that to people. We don't hurt people in order to live our dreams. No. We'll take care of them. We'll take care of them. I know I'll do it later. I'll just do it later, right? And so that little person inside is all of a sudden beating the drum louder than like you started like a new path and you were like gonna pitter patter over here. And then this like person inside starts beating a louder drum like, no, that's too scary. We can't do that. They get your glass ceiling and they're like pushing you back down to who you're comfortable being. And that is the hardest part of deciding to break through that, is that you cannot be the person that you were in order to go towards what you want. So how do we practice that? What does that even look like? What do you mean? Like, I'm going to go try and live my dreams and something's going to stop me? So many tools, so many things that could help. One is identifying exactly who's present when you're trying to take action. And it's easier to do that outside of the action taking step. So it's easier to come to something like a journal or a meditation and think about where you want to go, and then asking yourself, what's in the way of getting there? What am I most afraid of? What parts are showing up? What little girl inside is unsure for us? Like who's present inside of me? If you've done any inner child work, you'll be very familiar with how often these patterns inside express themselves and yank your chain back and say, we can't do that. But it's really about the like biomechanical like mechanism that's stopping you, rather than, so like if you were like a machine and you just like always had the 7 gears that like go down your body, and they always are oiled in the same beliefs and frequencies, and you all of a sudden were like, oh, you know what? It would be so much easier if I took out the 6th gear and I just bypassed that, because they're all doing their job just fine. And your body would be like, no, we've always used the 7 gears. And you're like, but we don't really need number 6. Let's just get rid of that. And your body's like, no, this is not how we work. And if you put it into those like simple, like patterned terms, in order to shift a pattern and teach your body to no longer bite in and need number 6 as a theory, how do you re-oil the machine to not need number 6 and to just go forward anyways? And we have to address things at the root. We have to be curious enough to see what parts of our body are the friction part. If you are good enough and have tried this work enough, you can cut it off almost instantaneously. You can feel the resistance rise and be like, yeah, nah, we're not biting into that. I'm doing this anyways. We can start simpler. Like yesterday I was saying, like we ruminate and we usually can't make a choice that's good for us because there's so many good choices, or we don't want to sit down and listen. And so we just make no choice and we become like, stuck. So we can start by bypassing small decisions, like maybe a meal, or like you were going to get out and take a walk today, and instead of avoiding it, you just get up and you do it. But when it comes to those bigger goals, those bigger dreams, those bigger decisions, sometimes you have to preemptively live them out. You have to go into the space of like imagining yourself like leaving, imagining yourself opening the business, imagining yourself being there. But then you also have to kind of like dual inhabitate and be like, okay, dream person totally exists inside of me. Also, what exists inside of me is this very scared and afraid little girl. Now let's talk to her. So then we divert our attention and we come into the body or into the journal session, and we explore who's afraid, what they're telling us, and what is their, like for me, energy work is so powerful. Like, what does their energy look like? So whether you're talking to an inner child and you're like curious about her main emotional pattern, so she's anxious, she's worried, she's whatever, or if you're exploring like the body as like the physical, and you're like, okay, where am I holding this resistance? It's like, oh, in my belly. What does it look like? Oh, it's like a dense black rock. Or like, not everything has to be like darkness, but oftentimes it's dense. So much of our body and so much of our patterns are the density of repeating something instead of the breaking apart. And that was like the breath this morning in my post, where I was just like, you need to break apart the tension with your breathing, because you're so used to holding the anxiety tight and then carrying that around all day. But instead we want to breathe into that and soften it. So what's going to come out when we soften? Stories, parts, pieces of ourself that we haven't looked at. And what are they going to do? They're going to pulse as you allow yourself to see them. But they are not the truth, because you wouldn't have this dream, this idea, this desire if these were your truth. These are your patterns that you have to break to go towards your truth. And so sometimes it's going to become action steps. Sometimes it's going to become meditations where you're just letting those things break down and break apart. And in that duality of this grand knowing and this person that you are, and then your parts and your inner childs, you can have both exist. And particularly this higher self, this person who knows what she actually wants, can do a great job comforting this inner child and this, this part that is super scared. Like, you are capable of the both and that might be a little advanced for some of us, but I don't know, everyone I know who follows me here can absolutely do that duality of being both the mother and the child. And I think the last thing I would mention is that because you're so powerful and your dreams are so big, it's important to practice being that big person. And that also comes in the form of taking time to feel her. And what does it feel like to be the fullest version of yourself? Where in your body do you open and hold bigger space and that ground to be all that you're here to be? So if you're going to walk away from a relationship, if you're going to open a store, if you're going to do that, how much more space and what would it feel like to break apart what's there now to fully hold space for this thing that you are? And so as you are in your meditation, seeing, feeling, experiencing, and maybe you need to get specific details about like what it looks like. So if you're, walking away from a relationship, what does it look like in your independence? And what's the space like? And what are you buying and doing and exploring? And if you open a business and the plan goes really well and the business exists, what are you doing on the daily? And what does that look like? So you can think of physical manifestations and then how does it feel to do it? And you're starting to break those patterns and make your body and your brain connect into a new pathway of like, oh, this is who I am and what I do and how I do it. And it's really great to do it like instead of just listening to Gary Vee or somebody great who's going to like discipline you into how to get there. What you might find in your meditations is that you're going to have a unique way to get there. And when you're meditating on having this dream and you're holding space for it, you might realize that you're somebody who skips steps, or that you might realize that like in order to get there, you're going to need to like do a lot of creative work first. Like you're just going to draw all the time. And you're like, what does drawing have to do with opening a store? And you can judge yourself as your body, your mind-body connection can start to show you the path. The only thing your body is familiar with is its patterns. But as soon as you start to like be still enough to be like, oh, I don't have to be these patterns, then your body's like peeking through the cracks being like, I have other ways, I promise. But we don't usually slow down enough to see the other ways. And I think a lot of times in ancient times and older iterations of this like human existence, we were a slower species and we spent a lot of time in nature and connecting to the land and the slowness and the observation. And we were like in a receiving mode. We've been in a protective, projective mode for so long that I think sometimes we forget that like all of our answers are like inside of us. They're just kind of like stuck between the densities. And as we breathe and as we soften and as we explore and as we write and as we, divulge different areas of ourselves, we then break these patterns apart. But are we replacing those patterns with openness, with the freedom, with the possibility? And don't be afraid of like new patterns showing up, because you'll be capable of like breaking those too as you make new glass ceilings and new layers. But you can even be more just open to being yourself and like filling up your whole body with your soul essence so that you'll always be guided and not pressured and deceived by society, peers, parents, etc. But I was just thinking about that this morning. It's like, why can't we get there? Why can I never accomplish and move towards this goal? And that was my simple way of explaining that it's usually the body just really honed in on an old way of doing things. And this thing can't go that way. This needs to be breaking apart so that you can like step into this like great capacity. So, yeah, those are my thoughts this morning. And I let me know if you have any questions about it, but that is super powerful. You are capable of your dreams. They are not stupid. They are not above you. They are not something that you can't accomplish. And I think sometimes we want it to be super easy. And it is, if you can kind of take the time to break out part this work, which doesn't feel comfortable, but the more you're uncomfortable, you can look at what is uncomfortable, not be afraid of it, and then be like, oh, bye, and like step in to exactly who you're here to be. So those are my thoughts.